Entire cities have vanished from maps and then quietly reappeared elsewhere. Some capitals were built in jungles or deserts almost overnight. One Alaskan town literally loaded houses onto sleds and moved. A Swedish mining city is slowly sliding itself away from a crack. Japan rebuilt whole neighborhoods on raised land after a killer tsunami. In Mexico City, skyscrapers lean on top of a drowned Aztec capital. From Dubai's desert skyline to Hiroshima's rebirth, the ground keeps changing. So what makes a city start over instead of giving up? Let's travel through the places that decided to rebuild themselves from scratch. Mexico City built over the drowned Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. Under modern Mexico City, a drowned Aztec capital still waits. Tenochtitlan once floated on Lake Texcoco, crisscrossed with canals. When Hernán Cortés conquered it, he ordered the city leveled. Spanish builders reused temple stones to raise churches and palaces. They drained the shallow lake, then stacked new streets on mud. Over centuries, Mexico City sprawled far beyond the island foundations. But the old lake bed keeps sinking, tilting cathedrals and plazas. Engineers constantly inject grout and adjust pipes to fight subsidence. Walk downtown today and you literally tread over buried pyramids. Warsaw painstakingly rebuilt its old town after World War. Warsaw's old town looks centuries old, but most stones are new. During World War II, Nazi forces systematically flattened central Warsaw. After the 1944 uprising failed, they dynamited palaces and streets. Polish planners later faced a brutal choice: erase ruins or resurrect. They chose resurrection, using pre-war paintings by Bernardo Bellato as blueprints. Brick by brick, workers rebuilt facades to match those paintings. Behind those postcard fronts, many interiors hid plain socialist-era apartments. By the late 20th century, UNESCO recognized the reconstruction as unique. Tourists now drink coffee where resistance fighters once tunneled through rubble. Hiroshima reborn from nuclear ruins as a global peace city. Hiroshima today feels like any busy Japanese city, which is intentional. In August 1945, an atomic bomb erased most of downtown Hiroshima. Survivors first lived in burned-out shells, then in ramshackle shacks. Post-war officials debated leaving ruins as warning or rebuilding everything modern. They kept the atomic bomb dome, but redesigned the city around peace. Architect Tange Kenzo drew up wide boulevards and a central peace park. New riverside apartments rose where wooden neighborhoods had vanished in firestorms. School children helped plant trees, turning scorched riverbanks into green promenades. The city's layout now quietly funnels visitors toward memorials and museums. Lisbon completely redrew itself after the 1755 megathrust earthquake. Lisbon's elegant riverside squares exist because an earthquake erased the previous city. On All Saints' Day 1755, a huge quake shook Portugal's capital. Churches collapsed onto worshippers, then tsunami waves rolled up the Tagus. Fires burned for days, turning the medieval Baixa district into ash. Prime Minister Sebastião de Carvalho, later Marquis of Pombal, seized control. He reportedly told officials to bury the dead and feed survivors. Engineers replanned Baixa as a grid with earthquake-resistant wooden cage structures. Standardized building designs meant damaged blocks could be rebuilt very quickly. The result feels like a planned 18th century city dropped onto ruins. San Francisco rebuilt at lightning speed after the 1906 quake. San Francisco likes to brag about resilience, and 1906 proves why. That April, a massive earthquake snapped gas lines and broke water mains. Fires raged for days, destroying much more than the shaking did. City leaders immediately staged photo ops on surviving steps of City Hall. They pushed a slogan, "San Francisco is still here," to investors. Insurance money and gold rush fortunes poured into hastily drawn reconstruction plans. Streets were widened, hills regraded, and new steel-framed buildings rose. The rebuilt Market Street proudly showed off streetcars, theaters, and department stores. Within a decade, postcards advertised the catastrophe as proof of unstoppable growth. Chicago rose in steel and skyscrapers after the Great Fire. Chicago's skyline of steel exists because wood burned almost completely away. In 1871, the Great Chicago Fire leveled thousands of wooden buildings. The blaze jumped the river, fed by lumber yards and grain elevators. Afterward, businessmen refused to abandon the key Midwestern Railroad hub. Architects like Louis Sullivan experimented with fireproof steel frames and elevators. City ordinances pushed brick and stone downtown, banishing cheap wooden tenements. London remapped streets and skylines after the Great Fire. Modern central London owes its wide streets to a bakery catastrophe. In 1666, the Great Fire started on Pudding Lane and spread. Narrow medieval lanes funneled wind and sparks, turning timber houses into chimneys. Architect Christopher Wren proposed a grand Baroque grid with piazzas and boulevards. Parliament balked at radical changes, worried about property rights and cost. Instead, surveyors widened key streets and straightened some chaotic alleyways. Building codes now demanded brick and stone rather than exposed timber. The rebuilt St. Paul's Cathedral became a symbol of tougher, redesigned London. Beneath many present offices, archaeologists still uncover fire-reddened foundations. New Orleans re-engineered levees and neighborhoods after Hurricane Katrina flooding. New Orleans technically survived Katrina, but large pieces had to restart entirely. In 2005, levee failures flooded about 80% of the city. Water sat for weeks in neighborhoods like the lower Ninth Ward. Residents were scattered across states, while mold consumed abandoned wooden houses. Engineers and the Army Corps redesigned levees, pumps, and surge barriers. City planners introduced elevation requirements and buyouts in repeatedly flooded zones. Some districts, like Lakeview, slowly refilled. Others became ghostly open lots. Cultural anchors, music clubs, Mardi Gras crews, corner po' boys guided symbolic recovery. Every hurricane season now tests whether the re-engineered defenses truly worked. Rotterdam designed a brand new downtown after Nazi bombing raids. Downtown Rotterdam feels oddly modern because bombs erased almost everything older. In May 1940, German aircraft bombed the city center into rubble. The Dutch government capitulated soon after, preventing further destruction elsewhere. Rotterdam chose not to recreate its medieval maze of streets. Planners cleared the ruins and drew wide avenues toward the river. They embraced modernist architecture, from cube houses to the Linbaan shopping street. New port facilities and bridges turned the harbor into Europe's busiest gateway. For decades, empty plots remained as silent scars between new buildings. Only recently has Rotterdam started rebuilding traditional-looking facades along the waterfront. Dresden reconstructed its Baroque center from blackened wartime rubble. Dresden's Baroque skyline is younger than many visitors instinctively assume. Allied bombing in 1945 turned much of the Saxon capital to ruins. Firestorms gutted the Frauenkirche, Zwinger Palace, and dense residential neighborhoods. East German authorities initially left many ruins as stark anti-war memorials. Housing blocks in the socialist Plattenbau style rose around broken churches. After German reunification, citizens pushed to reconstruct the Frauenkirche stone by stone. Cracked original blocks were catalogued, then slotted back like a puzzle. Dark, war-scorched stones now speckle the church's otherwise pale new walls. Standing in the rebuilt square, it's hard separating replica from survivor. Manila rebuilt, a devastated capital from World War II ruins. Old Manila was called the Pearl of the Orient before destruction. During World War II, Japanese troops and American shells devastated Intramuros. Civilian casualties were enormous as house-to-house fighting tore through districts. After liberation, the Spanish-walled city was mostly heaps of stone. Developers later pushed highways and office towers through what remained inside walls. Only a few churches and fragments of Fort Santiago were carefully restored. Post-war suburbs like Quezon City took over as government and residential centers. More recently, heritage advocates have tried reviving plazas and streetcar memories. Visitors walking Intramuros today see both careful replicas and jarring modern intrusions. Beirut reconstructed its downtown again and again after civil war. Beirut's downtown has been rebuilt so often, locals joke about versions. Civil war from the mid-1970s to 1990 shredded central districts. Green Line battlefronts left bullet-pocked facades and crumpled hotels along seafronts. After the Taif Agreement, company Solidaire led a huge reconstruction project. Many damaged Ottoman-era buildings were demolished, not restored, angering preservationists. Developers laid new infrastructure, buried old streets, and created glossy shopping districts. Then came car bombs, political crises, and the massive port explosion. Once again, smashed glass and twisted metal filled familiar commercial blocks. Beirut's story keeps looping between rebuilding dreams and sudden, violent setbacks. Mostar rebuilt its famous Ottoman bridge and war-shattered Old Town. Mostar's postcard stone bridge actually dates from the 21st century. The original Stari Most, built under the Ottomans, stood for centuries. During the Bosnian War in the 1990s, shelling finally collapsed the arch. Television footage showed the bridge sliding into the Neretva like slow stone. After peace agreements, UNESCO and local engineers planned a careful reconstruction. Divers salvaged original blocks from the riverbed for reuse where possible. Stonemasons quarried matching limestone and rebuilt the arch using traditional techniques. By 2004, jumpers again leaped from the bridge into deep water. Tourists now see a symbol of both destruction and painstaking return. Kobe rebuilt port, freeways, and neighborhoods after the 1995 earthquake. Kobe's sleek port and highways sit where chaos reigned in 1995. The Great Hanshin earthquake hit before dawn, collapsing elevated expressways and houses. Televised images of a toppled highway bridge stunned viewers across Japan. Fires swept wooden neighborhoods, while rescue teams struggled through blocked streets. Reconstruction plans focused on reopening the busy port as quickly possible. Engineers rebuilt expressways with stronger foundations and better joints against shaking. Neighborhoods experimented with land readjustment, joining small plots into safer blocks. Commemorative parks preserve twisted rails and broken pillars beside new towers. For many residents, every passing freight train still echoes that morning. Tangshan rose again after one of history's deadliest earthquakes. Tangshan's modern avenues hide the memory of a nearly erased city. In 1976, a massive earthquake struck the industrial city before dawn. Many workers were sleeping in dormitories that collapsed almost instantly around them. Official casualty numbers remain controversial, but hundreds of thousands were affected. Chinese authorities decided to rebuild Tangshan in place rather than relocate. Temporary housing rows appeared first, then new factories and widened streets. Quake-resistant building standards were upgraded nationwide, using Tangshan as a painful lesson. A memorial park now marks the epicenter, with sculptures and preserved ruins. Survivor stories keep resurfacing whenever Chinese media discuss disaster preparedness today. Christchurch is still replanning its center after the 2011 earthquakes. Christchurch's city center still feels unfinished, like a draft in progress. In 2010 and 2011, earthquakes repeatedly hammered the South Island city. One shallow February quake caused especially violent shaking right under downtown. Iconic stone buildings like the Christchurch Cathedral lost towers and walls. Whole blocks inside the so-called red zone were fenced off for years. Authorities demolished hundreds of unsafe structures, leaving huge gravel parking lots. Residents suddenly had to imagine what kind of city should replace emptiness. Pop-up container malls, street art, and temporary wooden churches filled gaps first. Long-term plans now mix green river corridors, low-rise cores, and resilient infrastructure. Goma rebuilt homes directly on lava after Nyiragongo's eruptions. Few cities rebuild on lava, but Goma keeps doing exactly that. In 2002, Mount Nyiragongo's lava flows cut straight through Goma. The molten rock crossed the airport runway and carved black rivers downtown. Tens of thousands fled toward Rwanda, many carrying belongings on heads. When lava cooled, returning residents started building directly on the hardened rock. Engineers worried about ground cracks and gas, but options were limited. Streets now run where lava once glowed, with shops along edges. Another eruption in 2021 sent new flows toward the same vulnerable neighborhoods. Goma's map keeps updating, but Nyiragongo still dominates every planning conversation. Rikuzen Takata raised its ground and moved inland after tsunami. Rikuzen Takata almost disappeared from maps before choosing a radical rebuild. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake sent a massive tsunami into this coastal city. Wave heights reportedly reached several stories, wiping out neighborhoods near the bay. The famous Takata pine forest was reduced to a single surviving tree. Officials decided not just to rebuild, but to raise the land. Excavators shaved nearby hills, moving soil to elevate the former downtown. New seawalls and breakwaters were constructed farther out along the coast. Residential areas shifted inland and uphill, away from direct wave paths. The solitary Miracle Pine statue now watches over a higher, reshaped shoreline. Valdez, Alaska shifted its entire town after the 1964 quake. Valdez, Alaska quietly moved itself after learning the ground wasn't safe. The 1964 Good Friday earthquake triggered underwater landslides that ruined its harbor. Port facilities slumped, and parts of the waterfront simply slid underwater. Investigations showed the town's glacial silt foundations could liquefy in quakes. Instead of rebuilding in place, officials selected a new town site nearby. Buildings were jacked up, loaded onto sleds or trailers, and hauled inland. Residents watched houses roll along roads like very slow wooden ships. The old town site was gradually abandoned and later burned for safety. Today's Valdez sits on firmer ground, still facing Alaska's dramatic mountains. Kiruna, Sweden is physically moving town center away from mine. Kiruna is literally sliding its center away from an expanding mine. The Swedish town grew around a huge underground iron ore deposit. Mining tunnels undercut older neighborhoods, increasing the risk of ground subsidence. Engineers mapped future cracks and declared parts of central Kiruna unsustainable. Rather than stop mining, authorities planned to move the town westward. Iconic buildings like the wooden church are being carefully dismantled and relocated. New housing blocks and a railway station are rising nearby. Residents are watching entire streets disappear from maps over a few decades. Kiruna's relocation may become a blueprint for other mining-dependent communities. Brasilia, high modernist capital city, carved from Brazil's remote interior. Brasilia looks futuristic because it was built almost all at once. In the late 1950s, Brazil wanted an inland capital away from Rio. President Juscelino Kubitschek backed architect Oscar Niemeyer and planner Lucio Costa. They designed the city like an airplane, with monumental government axes. Residential superblocks grouped apartments, schools, and shops along sweeping curved wings. Construction crews carved the city out of Cerrado scrubland in just years. Workers lived in temporary camps that later became satellite cities around Brasilia. In 1960, the government officially transferred from coastal Rio de Janeiro. From the air, Brasilia's symmetry still screams mid-century optimism and control. Canberra Compromise, capital built from scratch between rival cities. Canberra exists because Sydney and Melbourne could not stop arguing. After Australia federated in 1901, politicians needed a neutral capital location. They picked a rural site in New South Wales, far inland. American architect Walter Burley Griffin won an international design competition. His plan used geometric axes, artificial Lake Burley Griffin, and garden suburbs. Construction moved slowly, delayed by wars, budgets, and intergovernmental squabbles. Government offices gradually migrated from Melbourne, filling in the planned parliamentary triangle. Today's Canberra mixes bushland reserves, roundabouts, and carefully separated districts. Visitors often joke it feels designed more for cars than pedestrians. Islamabad was planned from nothing to replace crowded Karachi as capital. Islamabad shows what happens when a country builds bureaucracy from scratch. In the 1960s, Pakistan moved its capital from crowded Karachi inland. Greek planner Konstantinos Doxiadis designed Islamabad with sectors and wide green belts. The Margalla Hills formed a backdrop, with the new city at foothills. Government buildings clustered in the so-called blue area and nearby zones. Diplomatic enclaves and housing sectors followed an orderly grid, numbered and labeled. Old Rawalpindi next door kept its bazaars, noise, and crowded railway station. Over time, Islamabad spread outward, filling planned sectors faster than expected. Today, visitors might fly into Karachi, but decisions often come from Islamabad. Abuja, Nigeria's purpose-built capital, rose from bushland in 1980s. Abuja was designed in the center of Nigeria as a fresh start. Lagos, the former capital, struggled with congestion, politics, and coastal vulnerability. In the late 1970s, planners chose a hilly inland site instead. The Abuja Master Plan envisioned districts for government, business, and housing. Construction accelerated in the 1980s and 1990s despite economic swings. National Assembly buildings and Aso Rock Villa became its political landmarks. Road networks radiate from the Three Arms Zone like spokes on wheels. As ministries moved north, workers filled satellite towns and informal settlements nearby. Abuja now represents federal neutrality in a country with strong regional identities. Astana, futuristic Kazakh capital, sprang up on empty steppe. Astana rose from the Kazakh steppe like a science fiction set. In the late 1990s, Kazakhstan shifted its capital from Almaty northward. Officials cited central location, security, and room for massive expansion. Architects including Kisho Kurokawa and Norman Foster shaped futuristic landmarks. Buildings like Batorek Tower and Khan Shatir Tent dominate the flat horizon. Wide boulevards, grand plazas, and shining government ministries appeared in quick succession. The city's name even changed temporarily to Nur Sultan, honoring the longtime president. Harsh winters mean many dramatic glass facades endure blizzards and minus temperatures. Astana's story intertwines national branding, oil money, and sheer architectural spectacle. Naypyidaw, Myanmar's secretive new capital, suddenly appeared in the jungle. Naypyidaw appeared so suddenly that even many Burmese were confused. In the 2000s, Myanmar's military government quietly built a new capital inland. The move shifted power away from crowded, sensitive Yangon on the coast. Naypyidaw features massive empty highways with so many lanes they look surreal. Government complexes sit in separate zones, spaced out by long green buffers. Some foreign diplomats reported driving past more goats than pedestrians near ministries. The parliament building itself sprawls across multiple domed structures behind checkpoints. Rumors swirled about astrological advice, security fears, and bunker-like underground facilities. Whatever the reasons, Myanmar effectively created a brand new administrative landscape overnight. Nusantara, Indonesia's brand new capital, is rising in Borneo's rainforest. Indonesia's planned capital, Nusantara, is trying to build a future forest city. Jakarta, the current capital, faces sinking land, floods, and overcrowding. Leaders chose a site in East Kalimantan on Borneo, seen as safer. Plans describe a walkable green city powered partly by renewable energy. Designers want government buildings surrounded by jungle rather than endless traffic jams. Early construction has focused on core infrastructure, offices, and presidential residences. Critics worry about impacts on local communities, forests, and orangutan habitats. Supporters argue spreading development beyond Java could rebalance Indonesia's economy. If Nusantara succeeds, Jakarta's national role may gradually shrink over decades. Putrajaya, Malaysia's ultra-planned administrative capital built from swamps. Putrajaya looks almost like a theme park of Malaysian government architecture. In the 1990s, Malaysia planned an administrative center south of Kuala Lumpur. The site was mainly oil palm plantations and swamps before construction started. Engineers created a large man-made lake and multiple bridges as focal points. Perdana Putra Complex and Putra Mosque showcase domes, colonnades, and Islamic-inspired details. Many civil servants commute daily from Kuala Lumpur using highways and trains. Residential precincts feature landscaped boulevards, parks, and carefully planned neighborhoods. Critics sometimes describe the city as quiet or even eerily empty. Still, Putrajaya firmly shifted much day-to-day federal work away from Kuala Lumpur. Chandigarh, India's Le Corbusier-designed capital, built after partition. Chandigarh became a symbol of modern India, literally rising from partition lines. After 1947, Punjab's historic capital Lahore ended up inside newly created Pakistan. India needed a new state capital on its side of the border. French-Swiss architect Le Corbusier refined earlier plans for a modernist city. He divided Chandigarh into numbered sectors, each with schools, shops, and housing. The capital complex featured striking concrete buildings for the High Court. Trees and green belts were carefully integrated to soften the rigid geometry. Many Indian planners later studied Chandigarh when designing other post-independence cities. Residents today navigate roundabouts that still carry Le Corbusier's original numbering system. Shenzhen Fishing Village transformed into a hyper-grown megacity in decades. Shenzhen might be the world's fastest transformation from village to megacity. China designated it a special economic zone to experiment with market reforms. Factory zones, ports, and housing blocks sprang up across former rice fields. Migrant workers poured in from across China, filling dormitories and assembly lines. Skyscrapers soon followed, with landmarks like the Ping An Finance Center. The city effectively rebuilt itself every decade, replacing low factories with towers. High-speed rail links and metro lines stitched together once distant neighborhoods. Shenzhen's story still shapes how China imagines future, brand-new urban zones. Dubai reinvented itself, from dusty port to glittering megacity. Dubai's forest of skyscrapers rose from what was mostly desert trading port. In the mid-20th century, Dubai relied on pearling and modest trade. Oil revenues and strategic geography let rulers plan huge infrastructure projects. Engineers expanded Port Rashid, built Jebel Ali, and extended runways. Then came audacious urban ideas: Palm Islands, Burj Al Arab, Burj Khalifa. A skyline of glass towers replaced low coral houses along the creek. Air-conditioned malls and artificial ski slopes attracted both tourists and residents. Megaprojects sometimes stalled during downturns, leaving half-finished islands and towers. Still, Dubai's rapid rebuild turned a small port into a global brand. Singapore totally replanned, from colonial port to dense green metropolis. Singapore's neat skyline and public housing came from ruthless post-colonial replanning. After independence in the 1960s, the city-state faced overcrowding and slums. Colonial shophouses and kampong villages lacked sanitation, water, and enough space. The Housing and Development Board launched massive estates of high-rise apartments. Families moved from wooden stilt houses into concrete flats with modern plumbing. Downtown, planners cleared riverbanks and built new financial district towers. Urban campaigns pushed hawker centers, greenery, and strict rules about cleanliness. Land reclamation extended the island's edges, creating room for ports and airports. Decades later, it's hard to picture the chaotic pre-redevelopment waterfront anymore. New Songdo. South Korea's smart city, built entirely on reclaimed land. New Songdo City in South Korea was marketed as a smart city. Developers built it on reclaimed land near Incheon International Airport. From the start, fiber optic networks and sensors were woven into infrastructure. Master plans included parks, canals, and glass towers around a central park. Many streets and blocks were modeled loosely on Manhattan's grid and neighborhoods. Early residents moved into high-rise apartments overlooking still empty office districts. International schools and convention centers tried to attract global companies and families. At times, critics described Songdo as feeling half-occupied or overly planned. Nonetheless, it represents one of the most complete experiments in building new. Skopje remade its center with controversial neoclassical monument project. Skopje's center suddenly filled with statues, columns, and faux classical facades. An earthquake in 1963 had already forced the Macedonian capital to rebuild. Post-quake planners favored modernist concrete blocks and functional socialist-style buildings. Decades later, the Skopje 2014 project tried to remake the city's image. Government-funded monuments appeared everywhere, depicting historical figures and allegorical scenes. Bridges and museums received neoclassical veneers with rows of ornate pillars. Supporters saw a proud national identity project. Critics called it kitsch overload. The makeover effectively layered a theatrical new city onto earthquake-era structures. Visitors now photograph Baroque-looking buildings that are barely a decade old. St. Petersburg, Russia's imperial capital raised from Baltic marshes. St. Petersburg was a deliberate imperial project planted on swampy Baltic marshes. Around 1700, Tsar Peter the Great wanted a European seaport. He captured land from Sweden and ordered nobles to relocate north. Workers drove piles into mud, diverting the Neva's branches for embankments. Canals and straight avenues mimicked Amsterdam and other Western European models. Palaces like the Winter Palace and Peterhof showcased Baroque extravagance along rivers. Floods regularly threatened the young city, occasionally swamping whole districts. Later czars added railways, factories, and crowds to the planned streets. Yet the basic layout still reflects Peter's original demand for a showpiece. Ypres, Belgium. Rebuilt. Medieval squares and cloth hall almost from memory. Ypres looks medieval, but much of it is meticulous post-war reconstruction. World War I trench warfare turned this Belgian town into shell-pocked ruins. Buildings like the Cloth Hall and St. Martin's Church were heavily damaged. After the war, some British leaders suggested leaving ruins as memorials. Local residents insisted on rebuilding their town rather than preserving devastation. Architects used old drawings and surviving stones to recreate Gothic facades. The Cloth Hall's tower was reconstructed, dominating the market square again. Cemeteries and the Menin Gate Memorial took over commemoration duties instead. Visitors often only realize the buildings are replicas after hearing local guides. L'Aquila, Italy, still repairing and partly relocating after 2009 quake. L'Aquila still feels half frozen between rubble and restoration after its earthquake. In 2009, a strong quake shook this Abruzzo mountain city before dawn. Historic churches, student housing, and medieval streets all suffered heavy damage. Many residents spent months in tent camps and temporary modular buildings. Authorities fenced off the old center, creating a red exclusion zone. Some buildings were supported by steel braces, waiting years for proper repairs. Meanwhile, new housing developments appeared on the outskirts, changing daily life patterns. Legal battles over responsibility and safety standards slowed many reconstruction decisions. Walking through today, you can see cranes beside still cracked Renaissance facades. Concepcion, Chile, shifted, rebuilt, and reinforced after repeated megaquakes. Concepcion has shifted, shaken, and rebuilt so often it practically practices earthquakes. The Chilean city has faced repeated major quakes, including one in 2010. Historically, earthquakes even pushed authorities to move the settlement inland. The 2010 Mall earthquake and tsunami damaged bridges, ports, and apartment blocks. Looting images grabbed headlines, while residents struggled with aftershocks and power cuts. Reconstruction focused on rebuilding housing quickly and reinforcing crucial transportation links. New building codes emphasized stronger concrete frames and better detailing against shaking. In some areas, coastal projects were reconsidered because of tsunami exposure. Concepcion's repeated comebacks make it central in Chile's seismic planning stories.